Chapter 4. Darkness. At 3 in the morning, the chief Sussex detective, obeying the urgent call from Sergeant Wilson of Birlstone, arrived from headquarters in a light dog cart behind a breathless trotter. By the 5:40 train in the morning, he had sent his message to Scotland Yard, and he was on the Birlstone station at 12 o'clock to welcome us. Mr. Mason White was a quiet, comfortable-looking person in a loose twill suit, a clean-shaven, ruddy face with a stoutish body, and powerfully bandy legs adorned with gaiters, looking like a small farmer, a retired gamekeeper, or anything on earth except a very favorable specimen of a provincial criminal officer. "Right down snorter, Mr. MacDonald," he kept repeating. "I'll have the pressmen down like flies when they understand it. I'm hoping we'll get our work done before they go poking their noses into it and messing up all the trails. There's been nothing like this that I can remember. There's some bits that will come to you, Mr. Holmes, or I am mistaken. And also, Dr. Watson, for the medicos, will have a word to say before we finish. Your room is at the Wellville Arms. There's no other place, but I hear it's clean and good. The man will carry your bags. This way, gentlemen, if you please." He was a very bustling and genial person, the Sussex detective. In 10 minutes we had all found our quarters. In 10 more we were seated in our parlor of the inn, being treated to a rapid sketch of those events which had been outlined in the previous chapter. MacDonald made the occasional note, while Holmes sat absorbed with the expression of surprised and reverent admiration with which the botanist surveys a rare, precious bloom. "Remarkable," he said, as the story was unfolded. "Most remarkable. I can hardly recall any case where the features have been more peculiar." "I thought you would say so, Mr. Holmes," said White Mason, in great delight. "We're well up on the times in Sussex, and I've told you now how matters were, up to the time when I took over from Sergeant Wilson between 3 and 4 this morning. My word, I made the old mayor go, but I need not have been in such a hurry as it turned out, for there was nothing immediate that I could do. Sergeant Wilson had all the facts. I checked them and considered them, and added maybe a few of my own." "What were they?" asked Holmes eagerly. "Well, I first had the hammer examined. There was Dr. Wood there to help me. We found no signs of violence upon it. It was hoping that if Mr. Douglas defended himself with the hammer, or he might have left his mark in the murder before he dropped it on the mat. But there was no stain." "Of course, that proves nothing at all," remarked Inspector MacDonald. "There have been many a hammer murder, and no trace on the hammer." "Quite so. It doesn't prove it wasn't used, but there might be then stains, and that would have helped us. As a matter of fact, there were none. Then I examined the gun. There were buckshot cartridges, and, as Sergeant Wilson pointed out, the triggers were wired together so that if you pulled on the hinder one, both barrels were discharged. Whoever fixed that up made up his mind that he was going to take no chances of missing the man. The sawn gun was not more than 2 feet long. One could carry it easily under one's coat. There was no complete marker's name, but the printed letters PEN, which were flung between the barrels, and on the rest of the name had been cut off by the saw." "A big P with a flourish above it. E and N smaller?" asked Holmes. "Exactly." "Pennsylvania Small Arms Company, a well-known American firm," said Holmes. White Mason gazed at my friend as little village practitioner looks as a Harley Street specialist, who by a word can solve difficulties that perplex him. "That is Very helpful, Mr. Holmes. No doubt you are right. Wonderful, wonderful. Do you carry the names of all the gun makers in the world in your memory? Holmes dismissed the subject with a wave. No doubt it was an American shotgun, White Mason continued. I seem to have read the sawed-off shotgun as a weapon used in some parts of America. Apart from the name upon the barrel, the idea had occurred to me. There is some evidence, then, that this man who entered the house and killed its master was an American. MacDonald shook his head. Man, you're surely traveling over fast, he said. I've heard no evidence yet that any stranger was ever in the house at all. The open window, the blood on the sill, the queer card, marks on the boots in the corner, the gun. Nothing there that could have not been arranged. Mr. Douglas was an American, or had been living long in America, so had Mr. Barker. You don't need to import American from outside in order to account for American doings. Ames the butler? What about him? Is he reliable? 10 years ago, with Sir Charles Condis, solid as a rock. He has been with Douglas ever since he took the manor house 5 years ago. He has never seen a gun of this sort in his house. The gun was made to conceal. That's why the barrels were sawn. It would fit into any box. He could swear that no such gun in the house. Well, anyhow, he had never seen one. MacDonald shook his obstinate Scotch head. I'm not convinced that there's any ever one in the house, he said. I'm asking you to reconsider. His accent came more Aberdonian as he lost himself in his argument. I'm asking you to consider what it involves if you suppose that this gun was ever brought into the house and that these strange things were done by a person from outside. Oh man, it's just inconceivable. It's clean common against sense. I put it to you, Mr. Holmes, judging by what we have heard. Well, state your case, Mr. Mac, said Holmes in his most judicial style. The man is not a burglar, supposing that he ever existed. The ring business and the card point to premeditated murder for some private reason. Very good. There's a man who slips in the house with a deliberate intention of committing murder. He knows, if he knows anything, that he will have difficulty in making his escape, and his house is surrounded by water. What weapon would he choose? Would you say the most silent in the world? Then he could hope, when dead was done, to slip quickly out the window and wade the moat and get away from his leisure. That's understandable. But it is understandable that he should go out of his way to bring with him the most noisy weapon he could select, knowing well that it would fetch every human being in the house to the spot as quick as they can run, and that it is on all odds that he will be seen before he can cross the moat. Is that credible, Mr. Holmes? Well, you put the case strongly, my friend replied thoughtfully. It certainly needs a good deal of justification. May I ask, Mr. Mason White, whether you examined the farther side of the moat at once to see if there were any signs of the man having climbed out of the water? There are no signs, Mr. Holmes, but it is a stone ledge, and one could hardly expect them. No tracks or marks. None. Ha! Would there be any objection, Mr. Mason White, to our going down to the house at once? There may possibly be some small point which might be suggestive. I was going to propose it, Mr. Holmes, but I thought it well to put you in touch with the facts before we go. I suppose, if anything should strike you... White Mason looked doubtfully at the amateur. I've worked with Mr. Holmes before, said Inspector MacDonald. He plays the game. My own idea of the game, at any rate, said Holmes with a smile. I go into a case to help the ends of the justice and the work of the police. If ever I have been separated myself from the official force, it is because they have first separated themselves from me. I have no wish to ever score at their expense. At the same time, Mr. White Mason, I claim the rights to work in my own way and give my results at my own time. Complete, rather than at stages. I'm sure we are honored by your presence and show you all we know, said White Mason cordially. Come along, Dr. Watson, and when the time comes, we'll hope for a place in your book. We walked down the quaint village street with a row of pollard elms on either side of it. Just beyond that were two ancient stone pillars, weather-stained and lichen-blocked, bearing upon their summits the shapeless something which had once been a ramping lion of Capus of Birlstone. A short walk along the winding drive and such sward and oaks around it as one only sees in rural England. Then a sudden turn, and the long, low Jacobean house of dingy, liver-coloured brick lay before us, with an old-fashioned garden of cut yews on either side of it. As we approached it, there were a wooden drawbridge and a beautiful broad moat, as still and as luminous as quicksilver in the cold winter sunshine. 3 centuries had flowed past the manor house, centuries of births, of homecomings, of country dances, and of meetings of fox hunters. Strange that now, in its old age, this dark business should have cast its shadow upon the venerable walls. And yet, those strange peaked roofs and quaint overhung gables were fitting covering to the grim and terrible intrigue. As I looked at the deep-set windows and the long sweep of the duller-colored and water-lapped front, I felt that no more fitting scene would be set for such tragedy. That's the window, said White Mason. The one that immediate right of the drawbridge. That's just as if we found it last night. It looks rather narrow for a man to pass. Well, if I wasn't a fat man anyhow. Well, we don't need your deductions, Mr. Holmes, to tell us that. But you and I could squeeze through all right. Holmes walked to the edge of the moat and looked across. Then he examined the stone ledge and the grass border beyond it. I've had a good look, Mr. Holmes, said White Mason. There is nothing there, no sign that anyone has landed. But why should he leave any sign? Exactly. Why should he? Is the water always turbid? Generally about this color, the stream brings down the clay. How deep is it? About 2 feet on each side and 3 in the middle. So we can put aside the idea of the man having been drowned in crossing. No, a child cannot be drowned in it. We walked across the drawbridge and were admitted by a quaint, gnarled, dried-up person who was the butler, Ames. The poor old fellow was white and quivering from shock. The village sergeant, a tall, formal, melancholy man, still held his vigil in the room of fate. The doctor had disappeared. Anything fresh, Sergeant Wilson? Asked White Mason. No, sir. Then you can go home. You've had enough. We can send for if you want to. The butler better wait outside. Tell him to warn Mr. Sequel Barker, Mrs. Douglas, and the housekeeper that we may want a word with them presently. Now, gentlemen, perhaps you will allow me to give you the news I have formed first, and then you will be able to arrive at your own. He impressed me, this country specialist. He had a solid grip of fact and a cool, clear, common-sense brain, which would take him away from some of his profession. Holmes listened to him intently, with no sign of impatience which the official exponents too often produced. Is it suicide or is it murder? That's our first question, gentlemen. Is it not? If it was suicide, then we have to believe that this man began by taking off his wedding ring and sealing it. That he came down here in his dressing gown, trampled mud into the corner behind the curtain in order to give the idea that someone waited for him, opened the window, and put blood on the... We can surely dismiss that, said MacDonald. So I think suicide is out of the question. Then a murder has been done. What we have to determine is whether it was done by someone outside or inside the house. Well, let's hear your arguments. There are considerable difficulties both ways, and yet one or the other it must be. We will suppose that some person or persons inside the house did the crime. They got this man down here at a time when everything was still and yet no one was asleep. And then they did the deed in the queerest and noisiest weapon possible, as to tell everyone that it had happened. A weapon that was never seen in the house before. That does not seem very likely to start, does it? No, it does not. Well then, everyone has agreed that after the alarm was given, only a minute at the most had passed before the whole household, not Mr. Cecil Barker alone, though he claims to have been the first, but Ames and all of them were on the spot. Do you tell me that in the time a guilty person managed to fake footmarks in the corner, open the window, mark the sill with blood, and take the wedding ring off the dead man's finger, and all the rest of it? It's impossible. You put it very clearly, said Holmes. I'm inclined to agree with you. Oh, then we're driven back to the theory that it was done by someone from the outside. We're all still faced with some big difficulties, but anyhow, they have ceased to be impossibilities. The man got into the house between 4:30 and 6, and that is to say between dusk and the time that the bridge was raised. There had been some visitors and the door was open, so there was nothing to prevent it. It may have been a common burglar, or he may have had some private grudge against Mr. Douglas. Since Mr. Douglas has spent most of his life in America, this shotgun seems to be an American weapon. It would seem that the private grudge is the very more likely theory. He slipped into his room because it was the first he came into, and he hid behind the curtain. There he remained until past 11 at night. That time Mr. Douglas entered the room. It was a short interview, if there was any interview at all, for Mr. Douglas declares that her husband had not left her for more than a few minutes when she heard the shot. The candle shows us that, said Holmes. Exactly, the candle, which is a new one. It is not burned more than half an inch, which must be placed on the table before he was attacked. Otherwise, of course, it would have fallen when he fell. This shows that he was not attacked the instant that he entered the room. When Mr. Barker arrived with the lamp was lit, and the candle was put out. That's all clear enough. Well, now we can reconstruct a few of those lines. Mr. Douglas enters the room. He puts down the candle. The man enters from behind the curtain. He is armed with his gun. He demands a wedding ring. Heaven only knows why. But soon it must have been. Mr. Douglas gave it up. Then either in cold blood or in the course of a struggle, Douglas might have gripped the hammer that was found on the mat. He shot Douglas in the horrible way. He dropped his gun and also, it would seem, the queer card VV341, whatever that may mean. And he made his escape through the window and across the moat at the very moment that Cecil Barker was discovered the crime. How is that, Mr. Holmes? Very interesting, but a little unconvincing. Man, it would be absolute nonsense if it wasn't anything else but even worse, cried MacDonald. Somebody killed the man, and whoever it was could clearly prove to you that he should have had done it in some other way. What does he mean by allowing his retreat to be cut off like that? What does he mean by using a shotgun when silence is the one chance of escape? Come, Mr. Holmes, it's up to you to give us a lead, since you say Mr. White Mason's theory is unconvincing. Holmes had sat intently observant during the long discussion, missing no word of what was said, with his keen eyes darting to right and to left, his forehead wrinkled in speculation. I should like a few more facts before I go so far as theory, Mr. Mac, he said, kneeling down beside the body. Damn me, these injuries are really quite appalling. Can we have the butler in for a moment, Ames? I understand that you have often seen this very unusual mark, the branded triangle inside the circle, upon Mr. Douglas's forearm? Frequently, sir. You never heard any speculation of what it meant? No, sir. It must have caused a great deal of pain when it was inflicted. It is undoubtedly a burn. Now I observe, Ames, that there is a small piece of plaster at the angle of Mr. Douglas's jaw. Did you observe that in life? Yes, sir. He cut himself shaving yesterday morning. Did you ever know him to cut himself shaving before? Not for a very long time, sir. Suggestive, said Holmes. It may, of course, be a mere coincidence, or it may point to some nervousness which would indicate that he had reason to apprehend danger. Had you noticed anything unusual in his conduct yesterday, Ames? It struck me that he was a little restless and excited, sir. Ha! The attack may have not been entirely unexpected. We do seem to make a little progress, do we not? Perhaps you would rather do the questioning, Mr. Mac? No, Mr. Holmes, it's in better hands. Well then, we will pass to this card. VV341. It is rough cardboard. Have you any of the sort in the house? I don't think so. Holmes walked across to the desk and dabbed a little ink from each bottle of the blotting paper. It was not printed in this room, he said. This ink is black, and the other is purplish. It has been done by a thick pen, and these are fine. No, it has been done elsewhere, I should say. Did you make anything of the inscriptions, Ames? Nothing, sir. What of you, Mr. Mac? It gives me the impression of a secret society of some form. Same with this badge upon his forearm. That's my idea, too, said Mason White. Well, we can adopt it from a working hypothesis and see how far we are from the difficulties up here. An agent from such a society makes his way into the house, waits for Mr. Douglas, blows his head nearly off with his weapon, and escapes by wading the moat, after leaving a card beside the dead man which will, when mentioned in the papers, tell other members of the society that the vengeance has been done. That hangs all together, but why this gun of all weapons? Exactly. And why the missing ring? Quite so. And why no arrest? It's past 2 now. I take it for granted that since dawn, every constable within 40 miles has been looking for a wet stranger. Well, that is so, Mr. Holmes. But unless he has a burrow close by, or a change of clothes ready, they can hardly miss him. And yet, they have missed him up somehow. Holmes had gone to the window and was examining with his lens a blood mark upon the sill. It is clearly the tread of a shoe. It is remarkably broad, a splay foot, one would say. Curious because, so far as one can trace any footmark as this mud-stained corner, one would say that it is more shapely sole. However, they are certainly indistinct. What's this under the side table? Mr. Douglas's dumbbell, said Ames. Dumbbell? There's only one. Where's the other? I don't know, Mr. Holmes. There may have only been one. I only noticed them for a few months. One dumbbell, Holmes said seriously, but his remarks were interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. A tall, sunburned, capable-looking, clean-shaven man looked in on us. I had no difficulty in guessing that this was Cecil Barker, whom we had heard. His masterful eyes traveled quickly with a questioning glance from face to face. Sorry to interrupt your consultation, he said, but you should hear the latest. An arrest? No such luck, but they found his bicycle. A fellow left his bicycle behind him. Come and have a look. It's within 100 yards of the hall door. We found 3 or 4 grooms and idlers standing beside the drive, inspecting a bicycle which had been drawn out from a clump of evergreens and which it had been concealed. It was a well-used Rudge Whitworth, splashed as a considerable journey. There was a saddlebag with spanner and oil can, but no clue as to the owner. It would be a grand help to the police, said the inspector, if these things were numbered and registered. But we must be thankful for what we've got. If we can't find where he went to, at least we are likely to get to where he came from. But what in the name of all that is wonderful made the fellow leave it behind? And how in the world has he got away without it? We don't seem to get a gleam of light in the case, Mr. Holmes. Don't we? My friend answered thoughtfully. I wonder.